You can also watch Book TV's coverage of FreedomFest 2011 online at booktv.org. But first, here is Don Luskin on his book I Am John Galt, which profiles people who symbolize characters, both heroes and villains, in Ayn Rand's novels.
The last Rand character with an analogy in the real world I want to talk about, I'm going to end on a negative note. I'm going to end talking about a villain. Back to the Fountainhead. Everybody remember in the Fountainhead, the main villain was Ellsworth Toohey. He was a socialist. He was this scheming dwarf. He was a newspaper columnist who used his column to tell lies and manipulate. You guessed it, I'm talking about Paul Krugman. Now, back to the, you can't make it up stuff. The analogies between Krugman and Toohey are so striking, it's just downright eerie. They're both socialists. I'm going to quote Krugman here. He says, quote, "I am an unabashed defender of the welfare state, which I regard as the most decent social arrangement yet devised." He says that he advocates a state that offers everyone who's underpaid additional income. He and Toohey both hate rich people. Krugman once wrote in a column that rich people must be defenders of the downtrodden, otherwise they have no hope of, quote unquote, justifying their existence. So we have to kill them if they disagree with Paul Krugman? Now, there's a little bit of a hypocrite thing here, or are we surprised? Paul Krugman has to be a very wealthy man. We know from public records that he has a $1 million home in St. Kitts, he has a $1 million apartment in New York, he has a multi-million-dollar estate in Princeton, New Jersey, where he teaches. It's, I think, a 6,000 square foot home with 12-foot ceilings and a music room, and according to an article in the New Yorker, it has a fire pit outside where he and other Princeton faculty members have been known to burn in effigy various Republican politicians. So he hates the rich except for himself. Toohey and Krugman exalt the incompetent at the expense of the competent. Here's one of my favorite Krugman quotes. "The official ideology of America's elite remains one of meritocracy. That won't last." Both Toohey and Krugman are simply outright liars. No less a personage than Daniel Okrent, the public editor or ombudsman of the New York Times, once wrote, quote, "Paul Krugman has the disturbing habit of shaping, slicing, and selectively citing numbers in a fashion that pleases his acolytes." Both Paul Krugman and Ellsworth Toohey are physically very small. They've got Napoleon complexes. Freud said anatomy is destiny. I agree with that. Krugman once wrote, "I'm just not imposing enough in person to be inspiring. If only I were a few inches taller." Newsweek once called him gnomishly handsome. I agree with the gnomish part, at least. So what I want to know is the reason he opposed the Bush tax cuts, was when he said they are a step on the way to a system in which only the little people pay taxes? You be the judge. I report, you decide. Krugman is also probably a little crazy. He once wrote, and I quote, "My economic theories have no doubt been influenced by my relationship with my cats." This explains a lot. Okay, now this is the part where somebody says, "Well, didn't he win the Nobel Prize? Isn't he a respected economist?" Come on. Yasser Arafat won the Nobel Prize. Jimmy Carter won the Nobel Prize. Barack Obama won the Nobel Prize. Anybody can win the Nobel Prize. All you have to be is a liberal or a terrorist. The real test of an economist is whether you can make a correct prediction. In 1982, when Krugman was, get this, he was part of the Council of Economic Advisors in the Reagan White House. And he wrote a paper in 1982 when we had just come off like the all-time peak in U.S. inflation, at least since the Civil War. He wrote a paper called The Inflation Time Bomb, predicting that inflation would skyrocket and throw the world back into depression. Basically, ever since he wrote that paper, inflation has been lower. In fact, it's been practically at zero. He hates big government deficits, as long as they're in the Bush administration. And he's terrified that they're going to create sky-high interest rates. He loves deficits now in the Obama administration. He says, don't worry about interest rates. The U.S. has infinite borrowing capacity. In 1983, I created a project called the Krugman Truth Squad. Nowadays, the fancy word for what we did would be crowdsourcing, where you use the internet, blogs, to get dozens of like-minded people to participate in a joint project. And the project at the time was, every time Paul Krugman writes a column, all of you members of the Krugman Truth Squad stay up all night fact-checking it. Catch every lie, every error, every distortion, every misquotation, every out-of-context quotation, email me with it. I'll have it published on National Review Online the next day as a Krugman Truth Squad column. We did about 100 Krugman Truth Squad columns over 7 years. It resulted in dozens of major retractions by Krugman of errors and lies and distortions and misquotations. But before it did that, it had to result in not once but twice getting the New York Times, for the first time in its more than century-long history, to institute an official policy under which its opinion columnists are obliged to correct their errors. They didn't have that policy. Now, let me tell you what's so powerful about that. When they can't lie, liberals have nothing to say. I've just got the 2-minute mark, so I'm just going to end by saying that I had a personal experience with Paul Krugman that was not entirely pleasant. In the midst of all this that I've been talking about, I went to a book signing of his. I listened to him give a lecture to an audience that just hung on every word. At the end, I went up and had him inscribe to me a copy of his book, and I identified myself to him. The next week, he went on national TV and said that I was stalking him. Stalking is a felony. He went on national TV and accused me of committing a felony because I paid for his book and asked him to sign it. Now, let me tell you what happens in the age of the internet when someone like Paul Krugman goes on TV and accuses someone like me of committing a felony. For the next 3 weeks, I lived in a 24/7 world of hate. Death threats against my family. This stuff is blood sport. Make no mistake about it. This is why such rotten people are in public life. Because either they're the kind of insensitive people who just aren't hurt by those kinds of things, or they're just such puritanical fanatics that you can't get anything on them. Either way, you don't want them ruling you. So what's the Ayn Rand lesson here? Well, you can fight the power. You identify a force of evil like Paul Krugman. If you want to make it your hobby or your mission like I did, to take this guy down a peg, pull a few fangs out of him, make him less powerful, you can pay the price, but you can do it. Now, we've got a book signing coming up with me and John Allison. It's going to be in the Laissez-Faire booth right after here. I want you all to come. Sure, I want you to buy a copy of the book. I want you to get the book signed. And I promise I will accuse none of you of stalking me. Thank you very, very, very much.